My name is Chris Cuban. I'm with the St. Louis chapter of the PRSA. We want to thank you for being here today. Jon Goldberg is actually the founder and chief reputation architect of Reputation Architects Incorporated, a company he founded in 2009. He has more than 25 years experience, but he served as an advisor to corporate executives and corporate brands, as well as been a senior leader for some of the world's most prominent communicators. He's a frontline spokesperson for major corporation and nonprofit organizations, and his specialty is advising senior level executives and boards on how to successfully navigate activist attacks, government investigations, complex litigation, cybersecurity attacks or breaches, global product recalls, and workplace disasters. He's a speaker, an author, a commentator on reputation risk management, crisis and litigation, communication topics. He's also a member of the executive committee and 2021 chair-elect of the Public Relations Society of America Counselors Academy, and is a director at large of PRSA New Jersey. I also want to draw attention that when you're done this, if you're inspired by what Jon has to say, please go and register for his blog. He has Risks and Reputation Insights, a blog that he's currently doing a 6-part series on reputation, and I'll let him talk about it. But Jon, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I do encourage everyone, please use the chat feature or the Q&A. Ask questions during this webinar, because we're going to interrupt a little bit and have Jon ask or answer questions that people might have questions too. So Jon, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks for being here again today.
Sure. Well, Chris, thanks for having me. Hello to everyone. Thank you for coming to listen. I hope I bring you value. Just a couple of things. Chris, you reminded me that I need to update my bio. It's actually more than 30 years and closer to 35 in the crisis business, although I hate to hear the words come out of my mouth. So I'll need to change that. And, you know, I always appreciate a warm welcome like that. As a crisis guy, I'm used to being introduced as the guy nobody wants to see again. But I've gotten used to that. So let's dive right in here. You know, our topic is how to protect your organization against crisis from the inside out. And I'm sure everyone on the call knows that the best way to manage a crisis is to have a solid, well thought out, thoroughly tested plan. I do check this from time to time. Last time I checked, there were something like 400 million entries on Google that said exactly that. So I'm pretty sure you've heard it. I'm not going to lecture you on it. And in fact, I don't believe it at all. I like to say that despite what you read on Google, having a plan is only the second best way to manage a crisis. The best way to manage a crisis is to keep it from happening in the first place, to, in essence, immunize your organization against crisis. So we're going to talk today about how to start to immunize and inoculate against a particular kind of crisis. It's the kind of crisis that, from where I sit, poses the most reputational problems for organizations. And it's the one that results not from forces or events outside an organization, but from forces or events inside. It's the dreaded crisis from within, the self-inflicted crisis, if you will. You know, a big part of the reason these kinds of crises happen, why crises erupt or emerge internally, has to do a lot to do with the psychology of risk. You know, for one thing, risk is just an uncomfortable topic for most people. It's uncomfortable to have to talk about the potential for failure, for something to go wrong, for somebody to be in trouble. You know, as PR people, who wants to jinx their big idea or admit that the big campaign you're leading and about to launch could possibly go off the rails? So we'd rather not think about risk. So we don't think about risk, and that's a problem. The second thing we get hung up on is overconfidence. There are lots of studies showing that we tend to overestimate our ability to influence things that in reality are heavily determined by chance. And when we forecast risks, when we try to predict, we tend to believe the accuracy, our own accuracy, the accuracy of our forecasts, and underestimate the range of possible negative outcomes that could happen. We also tend to anchor our estimates of risk to what has happened, or more to the point, what has not happened in the past. And the trouble with that is the fact that something has never happened before has absolutely no correlation to the possibility of it happening in the future. We compound this with a form of confirmation bias. You may be familiar with the term, but basically what it means is we tend to put too much stock in information that supports what we want to believe, which in this case, that we'll be successful, that everything will work right, that we won't have problems. And we gloss over or downright ignore information that contradicts it, that something bad might happen. At the team level, teams also tend to engage and be influenced by organizational bias, more commonly known as groupthink. Has this happened to you? Say you're part of a team, someone has a big idea that people like and that gains the support of the group, and this is the direction things are going in. The more people who come on board, the more likely they are to suppress whatever objections, concerns, fears they have in order to fall in line with the group. So somebody can walk in and come on board and say, this is the worst, this is the riskiest, the most dangerous idea I've ever heard. But because everyone else seems to be going down that path, they go along with it too, when they could be the one person in the room who can head off a reputational firestorm. And then finally, there's something called the normalization of deviance. Over time, we learn to tolerate minor failures and minimize the warning signs of potential problems as false alarms, rather than alerts to possible imminent disaster. This in particular is what leads to patterns of bad behavior within organizations and even within industries. To give you one example, it's why Harvey Weinstein's lecherous behavior exposed an avalanche of similar accusations in Hollywood. People normalized Weinstein's behavior within the company, which is why it took so long to come out. Nobody was willing to talk about it. And they also normalized the idea within the industry that the casting couch, quote unquote, is simply the way that Hollywood works. So I want to talk about three categories of risk very quickly. The first to think about, we have external risks. These are dangers, things that are totally outside our control. The risk of an economic downturn, the risk of a currency devaluation or trade embargo, social risks, acts of God, acts of man, people outside your organization. Then we have strategic risks. These are risks our organizations and we take on voluntarily to achieve better returns on our capital and on our strategies. So could be the risk of engaging in an acquisition or a partnership with a third party, which could expose us to any reputation issues they have. Could be the risk of opening stores or outsourcing manufacturing to another country. It is a strategic risk that is designed to, that we accept as a way of advancing our business. And the goal with external risks, the goal is to try and get as much control as possible plan and mitigate the potential negative impacts if that risk comes to fruition. With strategic risks, the goal is to manage them. Similarly, minimize the risks, know what they are. The third kind of risk is the one that we're going to spend time talking about today, and these are the internal risks. The risks that come from within organizations, the risks that are generally caused by bad behavior of employees, bad judgment by our people, a failure to think through decisions and actions before making them. And we'll go through a lot of different versions of how that happens, but we're going to focus really on internal risks. And the goal with internal risks is to prevent them. And this is the one place where, because they're happening in your organization, they are within your control. So by focusing on them, you can actually head them off and reduce their frequency rather than simply plan for them and be ready when they happen. So there are three types of risk, but I believe there are actually only two flavors of crisis in the world. Every crisis you see, I challenge anyone to come up with an exception to this rule. Every crisis you see, read about, have to deal with in your organizations can be divided into two very simple categories. The first is where someone knowingly does something that's inappropriate, illegal, illicit, immoral, generally icky, but they're doing it on purpose. They're doing it knowingly. And I call that the crisis of evil. And when you have a crisis of evil within an organization, it's these kinds of things. It's bad behavior. It's Me Too. It's employee commits fraud, theft of trade secrets, misappropriation of IP. This is the icky, the moral turpitude. Interesting that you see these two people in the same photograph. Was very helpful when I was designing the slide. When you have a crisis of evil, the organization needs to send an unequivocal message that the organization has exposed the source of evil. The evil has come from outside and has permeated, has violated the organization. The organization disavows itself of that evil. It has fully and completely excised the evil, and it's taking the necessary steps to keep evil from happening again in the future. So, few ways to protect against evil. Mission and values play an important role in that. Codes of conduct, rules and policies, internal controls, compliance audits, and culture plays a role. But people who are intent on behaving badly, who are out for themselves, rarely pick up the employee code of conduct or happen by the company's values on a website and say, gee, maybe I shouldn't be selling our trade secrets to the Chinese. It's against the rules. So that's why you have the last three: internal controls, checks and balances. You can have random compliance audits and other systems for detecting irregularities. And culture can also play a huge role, but I'll get to that in a few minutes. So first we have the crisis of evil. Now let's look at the second flavor of crisis. But before we do, I just want to take a brief detour through the laws of nature that I think are responsible for the lion's share of crises that emanate from within organizations, and specifically as a result of people's actions and behavior. So, the fundamental laws of crisis management, you're probably familiar, I'm sure everyone's familiar with Murphy's Law, or at least you think you are. Murphy's Law is usually stated, as you see here, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. But interestingly, that's not quite correct. The original Murphy's Law, as the story goes, originated in the 1950s with an engineer named Murphy, logically, at Edwards Air Force Base. And Murphy's original law says that if there are two ways to do something, and one of those ways will result in a catastrophe, that's the one somebody's going to pick. So similar, but slightly different. But there's also a corollary to Murphy's Law that I've developed based on my careful observations over more than 30 years of crisis work. I call it Goldberg's Law of Crisis Management. And that is, in every situation, there is always at least one more idiot than you counted on. So that brings us to the second flavor of crisis, and that is the wrong slide. There we go, the crisis of stupid. The crisis of stupid, as opposed to the crisis of evil, happens because people use poor judgment. They don't use common sense. They happen because people take actions and make decisions without fully considering the risks. They're just not thinking about what they're doing and the broader implications of their actions and decisions for reputation, for other corporate objectives. They also happen because in organizations, as in life, people are creatures of habit. How many times have you heard, well, that's the way, we do it that way because that's the way we've always done it. And the way we've always done it is, as you can imagine, especially dangerous in the world we're living in today. Crisis of stupid, bad judgment, lack of common sense, just not thinking, unhelpful habits. The world we live in, if you think about the way your organization has always done things, say how you recruit on college campuses, or how, to really go down the communications path, how you go about reviewing and approving advertising creative or plans for brilliant PR stunts, or how you communicate with employees or not communicate with them about important social issues, which is something a lot of us, I suspect, have had to deal with over the last couple of months. If people in your organization are viewing things through the old lens of the way we've always done things, and not through the lens of the world we live in now, which is a world of political hypersensitivity, of economic consciousness and disparity, of warring social and cultural agendas, of all these things you see here, amplified by the fact that everyone with a smartphone is now a journalist. If you're not viewing things through the lens of current perceptions, people are going to do stupid things in your organization, or the organization is going to do stupid things that jeopardize reputation and give you and your executives heartburn. So let me give you just a few examples that I've come across recently. I have folders and folders of news clips on crises, but you look at these things, you can't possibly imagine that people thought these things were good ideas. Sending Me Too branded cookies to newsrooms. We do a lot of work in elder care and long-term care. So a fight club in a nursing home, I want to say it was shocking to me, but it wasn't. Dell employees a couple of years ago arrested over a marketing stunt went bad. I'm not sure how they could have thought that staging an ISIS kidnapping in Austin, Texas to get media attention was a good idea. But clearly, nobody thought that through. I love this example, and what happened here is that clearly no one at Snapple thought about what might happen if you try to erect a giant popsicle in the middle of an asphalt jungle, Midtown Manhattan, on a 90-degree day. Now, I'm hard-pressed to figure out, is that bad judgment, lack of common sense, not thinking? Is it the unhelpful habit of ignoring climate change? It's probably all three. And just a final one, what were Cartoon Network and its agency possibly thinking when they came up with the idea to promote Aqua Teen Hunger Force? What were they thinking when they came up with the idea of attaching these weird electronic devices to the sides of buildings and bridges around Boston? It's the device on the lower right. It was like an LED sign. In an environment where people are hypersensitive to terrorism, people are worried. Boston was the site of the marathon bombing. Who actually not just thinks of these things, but actually feels it's a good idea to go through with them? Well, if you don't have the right set of habits, the right checks and balances, it happens. Coors did something very similar years ago that involved chaining briefcases with clues to a scavenger hunt to fixed objects all over town. Now, what happens when people observe unattended briefcases chained to mailboxes and light posts in the middle of a crowded city? They might well have put the clues in pressure cookers. The bomb squad comes and blew their clues up. Clearly, no one asked, hey, people are really sensitive these days. Is there a risk we might be scaring people? If we really thought this through, it could have saved both Cartoon Network and Coors tons of money, could have saved the Cartoon Network CEO his job, and it could have saved, most importantly, on a lot of ridicule they suffered online. But these are really just, by way of example, the kinds of things that happen that start within corporations, within organizations, simply because people don't think. So let's talk about building a reputation habit. We talked a minute ago about how habits can create reputational issues and inadvertently trigger crises. So it stands to reason that if we focus on changing people's habits and behaviors in certain ways, we can prevent crisis. And the fact is, the most powerful way we have to immunize against crises that emanate from within an organization is not to go out and try and hire people with more common sense, because I've been trying for a long time, good luck with that. But to focus on changing the habits and patterns of behavior of the people you already have in helpful ways. Chris referenced my blog. I just wrote about this. It's part of an ongoing series on building crisis immunity. So I'm just going to hit the highlights, but I invite you to have a look at it and let me know if it provokes any ideas. Thinking about habits, it turns out there are certain kinds of habits, a special kind of habit that when you start changing them for the better, it can set off a cascade of other good habits. Exercise, something I'm unfamiliar with lately. Exercise is a good example. Study after study has shown that when people get in the habit of exercising regularly, and you may have noticed this yourselves, they also start to eat better. They make healthier food choices. They're not even thinking about it, but subconsciously they do. They develop better food habits. They get more sleep at night. They're less stressed, so they don't have that glass of wine every night. They're more patient with their families and their coworkers. Exercise is what's referred to as a keystone habit. If you haven't read the book, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, I strongly recommend it. There are lots of lessons for people in PR and communications. When organizations focus on attacking habits around reputation, when they focus on making reputation a keystone habit, it sets off the same kind of ripple effect as exercise does. How do you do that? You start by making clear that protecting an organization's most valuable asset, reputation, is everyone's job. And here's how it plays out. When employees actually understand why reputation is so important, not just to the organization, but how it contributes to their individual lives and livelihoods, they start to see their contributions to the organization and their work in a whole new light. They start to develop a deeper appreciation of the value of reputation and how easily it's damaged. They take reputation risks into consideration in their day-to-day work without even thinking about it. So they're thinking about things that, whether things potentially put reputation in jeopardy that previously they glossed over. They speak up when they see things that put reputation in jeopardy instead of ignoring it, because, you know, to them, reputation has always been corporate communications responsibility. It's somebody else's job. They're even more mindful of how social media blurs the boundaries between work and work and personal lives. And as a result, they become more careful about what they post online and how they appear outside work. So you have less issues with an employee's out of work, off time behavior coming back to haunt the company. The second thing to look at is what I call creating tests, not rules. Creating rules and policies as tempting as it seems, creating rules to try to dictate employees' every decision and how they should think in every situation is a recipe for disaster. United learned this lesson the very hard way when its security agents dragged the doctor off a flight at O'Hare back in 2017. And there was, of course, a full investigation as promised by the CEO. And the investigation found the root cause of that incident was very simple. Airlines are rules-based organizations. There is a rule for everything. The root cause of what happened on Flight 3411 was that employees at every level did exactly as they were told. They followed the rules, and that's what led to the disaster. So instead of creating rules that hamstring employees and prevent them from using common sense, from actually thinking for themselves and making decisions, you know, instead of creating rules, think about giving people a simple test, a rubric, if you will, a series of 3 questions that gets them in the habit, forces them to stop and think through whatever they're about to do. They're making a decision about, you know, what to say to a client, what have you. Whatever they are about to do before they proceed and inadvertently spark a reputational firestorm. Warren Buffett, I'm a huge fan. He just turned 90. He is a huge believer in habits. It's, you know, why he lives in the same house in Omaha he bought for 30 grand in 1958. He really believes in habits, and he has what he calls the newspaper test. Berkshire Hathaway Corporation, between the holding company and its 70-odd companies, Duracell, Geico, NetJets, Burlington Northern, Santa Fe Railroad, 390,000 people among them. And he encourages them to use what he calls the newspaper test. And it's why you probably can't remember the last time you read a scathing story about Berkshire Hathaway or any of the companies it owns on the front page of your local newspaper.
As to the future, the submission of this subcommittee details actions that I believe will make Solomon the leader within the financial services industry in controls and compliance procedures. But in the end, the spirit about compliance is as important or more so than words about compliance. I want the right words and I want the full range of internal controls. But I also have asked every Solomon employee to be his or her own compliance officer. After they first obey all rules, I then want employees to ask themselves whether they are willing to have any contemplated act appear the next day on the front page of their local paper, be read by their spouses, children, and friends, with the reporting done by an informed and critical reporter. If they follow this test, they need not fear my other message to them. Lose money for the firm and I will be understanding. Lose a shred of reputation for the firm and I will be ruthless. I welcome your questions.
So, and Buffett jokes that if a manager still feels the need to call him and ask what to do after applying the newspaper test, there's probably something wrong with him. It is just so clear, so easy for people to say, yeah, I don't want grandma reading about this. I better not do it. Incredibly effective. And there are other kinds of questions and rubrics. That happens to be, the one it's been in wide use. That video is 1991 when Buffett was brought in to clean up Salomon Brothers post-crisis. He's been using that, and you can't argue that a company that has outperformed the S&P 500 more than 50 years in a row isn't buttoned up and isn't doing the right things. So third thing you want to do is put your values to work to prevent crises. Values are an incredibly powerful tool for preventing corporate embarrassment of the self-inflicted variety. But they can't earn their reputational keep. They can't do anything for you if they're hidden away, as they so often are on a company's website. So like Mr. Buffett's newspaper tests, values are a way to give employees a uniform framework and get them in the habit of pausing to think things through before they take an action or make a decision or do something in their personal life that could inadvertently blow up for them and the company. So you want to set your values out, whether you have 4 or 5 or 6 or however many, set them out for employees as touchstones for decision-making. Encourage employees when they're making decisions to ask, is this consistent with our values? Which value does this support? If something supports at least one value, it's worth considering and should get further scrutiny. If you're doing something that goes against any values, well, that's a sure sign there's a problem there, and you need to look at it more carefully. So my message is, if employees don't know your company's values and what they stand for, and they aren't applying them in their day-to-day work, you're missing a huge opportunity to head off reputational problems. You want employees, for example, in a group setting, to ask questions like, is the direction we're about to take with whatever the decision is it aligned with our core values and what we stand for as a company, what we strive to be? It's a great way to be sure that everyone has considered the situation from all sides, has shared any concerns, and everyone is comfortable that the decision reached is the correct one before going forward. It's not entirely foolproof, of course. The the group can miss something and make a misguided decision, but it certainly helps. few more ways to protect against stupid, and this is all part and parcel of building a reputation habit. You know, if you're making reputation everyone's job, it's becoming a permanent part, either literally or virtually, of everyone's job description. You need to communicate that. You need to keep communicating that. You need to continue to reinforce it. Leaders have to model good reputation behavior, obviously. You need to be explicit about what the company expects from employees and the trust it's investing in them to safeguard reputation. The newspaper tests setting out values as a compass are a start. A lot of our clients make it a habit to require managers to put larger projects through a documented risk assessment process that we create for them in many cases as a condition of budget approval. So it forces them to go through a process that many people would just as soon, that makes people uncomfortable. They just as soon not have to think about, the project they're working on, how it could go off the rails. And it really comes down to the leadership is saying, you want the money, you want the budget, show us you've taken into account what could go wrong and how before we give it to you. It's the ultimate fiduciary responsibility, if you will. Make risk assessment a required process. And this is what I just spoke to. Give them the tools, but also create simple guidelines, simple rubrics, simple tools that force people to stop and think about what they're about to do. That is the number one best way. Stopping and thinking is the number one best way to prevent many kinds of crises. Look for teachable examples, and this goes along with continually reinforcing good reputation habits, reminding people what's entrusted to them as the guardians of reputation. Use competitors' reputation challenges, there but by the grace go we. Use competitors' challenges as teachable moments to stimulate discussion and refine best practices. Issues are going to slip through the cracks. When an issue does slip through the cracks, use it as an opportunity to hone good habits and reinforce why everyone needs to focus on reputation, not to point fingers or to assess blame, which turns people off and has just the opposite effect. Ultimately, what we're looking to do here is create within an organization what I like to describe as a risk-sensitive culture. And to do that, you're essentially doing things to foster, many of them I just talked about, an environment in which people at all levels are attuned to the risks that arise in the course of their everyday work. They're equipped and empowered to identify, assess, and communicate and address them. They have the tools and mechanisms at their disposal to escalate risks and do so. And they also have developed the right set of habits where they're taking ownership not just for their own risks, but for the risks of the people around them. So people are looking out for one another, and if they see something, when people in a risk-sensitive culture see something, they say something. Because ultimately they understand if there's a crisis and the reputation of the entire organization is damaged, it's not just the organization, it's their reputation, it's the reputation of their colleagues. They are all part of one thing. So I know we're coming up on time. Wanted to just share a couple of simple tools that we use. Feel free to take them away, modify them as you wish. One tool we use is what we call the 5-minute risk assessment. And it's really just a rubric, a series of questions that I encourage you to use and encourage you to have your people use, simply to think through, to guide them through thinking through decisions and actions. You know, are you launching a new creative campaign? Are you designing a new product? Are you, going to put funny slogans on T-shirts for your employees? Force them, get people in the habit of stopping and thinking through, how could this be misunderstood or misinterpreted? How could somebody find it offensive or insensitive or demeaning? These are critically important, especially the heightened cultural sensitivity, D&I sensitivity, economic and equality sensitivity we're dealing with right now. How could somebody possibly co-opt what we're about to do for their own agenda? Can it be gamed or broken? What does it leave to chance? Do we have control over all the important pieces? Have we tested every conceivable combination of inputs and outcomes to make sure that, there aren't 5,000 winners to this sweepstakes that should only have one winner? Have we thoroughly run the numbers? If we have larger than expected uptake, can we deliver what we're promising? And can we absorb the cost? What haven't we thought through? What's the worst, my favorite, what's the worst thing that can happen? When you start to think, right, what's the worst thing that can happen? It can be scary, but it also takes you down the path you need to be going down of evaluating the risks ahead of you, thinking them through, and making sure you have control, you have command of them before you do something. And you want your employees to have this kind of test, like the newspaper test, like a values-based set of touchstones, to guide them in their daily work and get them in the habit of using them. And then finally, there's something I've always called the jerk test. In slides, it's the jerk test. We call it something different here at Reputation Architects. But a great question to ask is, if somebody wanted to be the world's biggest jerk, what would they do? If somebody wanted to attack your marketing campaign on social media, how would they do that? If somebody has a bone to pick with your organization, if somebody's a disgruntled employee, somebody wanted to take out their anxieties on the organization, how might they do that in connection with what we are about to do? You need to think that through. So we've really come to the end of what I hope to lay out here. As Chris said, I welcome the opportunity to talk. I think, Chris, you can share the slides. I'm also happy to share the slides. If you just shoot me an email address, I'm happy to send our reputation risk rubric to help you size up your current state of risk readiness in your organization. Happy to send you that offline, and some other materials you might find helpful. And as commonly happens, if there are things keeping you awake at night that you would rather not discuss in front of a studio audience, I'm more than happy to discuss that too. One of the first things we did back in March as COVID was erupting, we blocked out time slots every day to provide hour-long free consultations to nonprofits and healthcare organizations, just to help them deal with reputational issues, questions, challenges, and we're continuing that. So feel free, if you have some sort of issue, it's a free hour of counsel. Feel free to take us up on that. Chris?
Well, Jon, thank you so much for being here today and working with us on your presentation. For those of you like myself that have had the pleasure of having several beers with you, I know that you've worked through almost every crisis that you possibly can come up with. So a lot of what PRSA is about building relationships with people. I belong to what's called Counselors Academy. It's a section of PRSA. and Jon is also a member of Counselors Academy. So we've met actually 4 or 5 years ago, and it's been a great relationship and building and kind of mutually generating ideas and directions. And I would like to throw it over though to Bridget in Kansas City. If you'd like to say a word or two, Bridget.
Hi, yes, thank you, Jon. Thank you so much for today's presentation. It's definitely a timely reminder and things for us to think about. I know we do. I work at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and every time we have a communications plan, we have to go through all of those questions. And we know exactly where people will go if they have complaints, and that's to social media. And so that changes the dynamics of everything as well. But it's always good to have the reminders and to see how other people do it as well.
Sure. Any other questions, Chris?
I would like to encourage everyone to put their questions in the Q&A or actually in the chat feature. I do want to bring up the fact that we do have a lot of non-PRSA members on this call. And like I said a minute ago, a lot about PRSA is about building those relationships. And even though we can't meet in person, being a part of an organization like PRSA is really a great opportunity to really meet people and pick each other's brains and really learn from one another. I do want to throw out there that if you would like to become a member of PRSA, they are currently doing a 2020 national promotion, which is the triple play promotion, which is a way for you to save a lot of money right now. If you use that triple play 20 code, you're going to save, I guess, 1 free year of chapter membership, 1 year of a section, but that does not include Counselors Academy or the new PR pros.
Yes, it does.
Oh, it does? Okay.
It does. I can't speak to new pros, but it does include Counselors Academy.
Okay.
We fought for that.
Awesome. Well, I'll have to talk to you after this about that. Free initiation fee as well. So you can save a lot of money if you become a member of PRSA right now by just using that promo code. So we encourage you to do that. And we do have several more webinars coming up. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is the 19th webinar we've done in 19 weeks. Next week, we actually have Peter Shankman. And for those of you that don't know Peter, he's kind of a PR guru who's been around for a long time. In fact, a lot of us got to know him back in the 90s when Yahoo was a thing with the Yahoo listservs. He created Haro, Help a Reporter Out, and is really one of those talking heads that's on all the national news outlets as well, talking about campaigns and promotions and communications. And after that, we have several more webinars that are already in the works. So is there anybody that has any questions? This is Jon, you did a great job in covering a lot of territory. I can't believe there's people that don't have questions here. Well, seeing none, Jon.
Well, either I've terrified them or put them to sleep. It's usually one or the other.
Well, do you have any last comments you'd like to make, Jon?
You know, no. Last comments. Focus. You know, if there's one thing, and this is really the theme of the blog series you mentioned, Chris, if there's one thing that COVID has taught us this year, if there's one lesson, it's that the best plans, the most thoroughly tested, rigorous, comprehensive plans will only take you so far when the entire world is going off the rails. So, you know, it's not a question of how many more pages and diagrams can you add to your crisis plan to cover the gaps, the fault lines that COVID exposed, that the pandemic exposed. You need to be thinking, that's not sufficient. You need to be thinking about how to address the underlying risks that are really what wreak havoc on companies. You know, people say, well, nobody could have predicted a pandemic. Nobody could have predicted how it spread. And that's entirely true. But in retrospect, what really caught companies off guard and flat-footed were simple things that they could have been aware of, like weak supply chains, you know, failures of technological and operational redundancy, over-reliance on outsourced labor or outsourced manufacturing in faraway lands that got shut down quickly by the pandemic. Those are all risks that can be addressed. You know, an individual organization isn't going to prevent a pandemic, but you can shore up your own defenses to make sure that if it happens again, and I just read a World Economic Forum survey of 350 risk analysts from around the world that say there's, I can't remember the number, a significant chance of a pandemic, either of SARS-CoV-2 or some other organism of similar magnitude over the next 18 months. So if you're not looking operationally, and communications needs to be at that table, if you're not looking operationally at how to mitigate and eliminate, inoculate against risks, your organization really should be.
Great advice, John. I truly appreciate your time and willingness to share your wisdom with all of us. I know there's a lot of students on here and people that have been on previous webinars we've done. We will put this on our YouTube channel for the St. Louis PRSA chapter. So if anyone would like to go to see some of our previous webinars, you can see them on the St. Louis PRSA YouTube channel. But thanks again, everyone, for joining us. We hope you have a great day. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you next week. Thanks again, John.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.